Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us for this session. I'm Paul Judge. This is David Maynor. What we want to spend some time on today is search malware. Share with you some of the results that we've seen. For probably the last several months, have been looking into this issue. Certainly over the last year, there's been many examples of malware poisoning popular search terms. I think we've all seen examples over the last year. So what our goal was to really kind of understand how much this is happening, understand where it's happening, understand a little bit about more about how it's happening. And so as we dug into this, I mean, one of the things that was pretty obvious here is kind of why the attackers are focused on the search engines. I mean, the number of eyeballs that are showing up on search engines every day is growing rapidly. I mean, if you look at the latest numbers from the search engines, you look at Microsoft, look at Yahoo, even Twitter now, and Google. There are hundreds of millions of searches done on each one of these every day. Microsoft totals in at over 4 billion searches a day. Yahoo at over 9 billion a day. Twitter now is claiming over 24 billion. A month. I said a day, but a month. And Google, of course, leads with over 80 billion searches a month. So the point is, as more information and more users come online, we all use search engines more and more. I know I've personally kind of come to the point that I'm so lazy that even if I know I'm going to a site like CNN, instead of just typing CNN.com, I don't have time to type the extra 4 characters, so I just put it in my search toolbar and let it do the work. Right? I see a lot of heads nodding, so a lot of people have kind of developed that habit. Right? So the point is, there's so many people going to search engines every day, and the attackers have realized this is a pretty good place to focus to get in front of eyeballs. And so what we wanted to do was understand kind of how they're targeting particular terms, how much they're targeting particular terms, are there particular categories that are more popular, and so forth. So with that, we set up a system, a methodology that crawled the different search engines. And it actually, around the clock, pulled and looked at what were the most popular search terms for Yahoo, for Bing, for Twitter, and for Google. And it looked at those most popular trending search terms around the clock and looked at what were the search results for those. And so we pulled those search results and then actually pulled the pages that those were pointing to and analyzed them. So if you look at what we looked at, it was 4 different search engines over about 2 months, 57 days to be precise. In that time frame, there were over 25,000 popular topics that we examined, and then over 5 million actual search results. So we want to dig into is what we found. So one of the first points is we found malware. All right, anybody surprised by that? Over 8,000 examples of malware across the different engines. If you look at the breakdown, the leader is Google. With 69% of the malware that we found being found on results from the Google search engine. After that was Yahoo with 18%, Bing with 12%. This is one of the first times in life Microsoft actually has this advantage of having a little market share, so kind of been the least attacked platform, right? The other one that you see on there is Twitter with 1%. And at first this was a little strange to us because we were pretty familiar with kind of how much malicious activity and misuse was happening on Twitter. But one of the things that kind of we understood as we dug into this is, well, what happens is with Twitter, if you think about how a search engine works, it actually organizes and ranks results. And so it makes it pretty easy for an attacker to use search engine optimization to actually make sure they're in that set of results that a user gets. Whereas with Twitter, for most of the time, the way their searches work, they just give you a snapshot of who's talking about this right now. So there's not that ranking, there's not that prioritization. And so for an attacker to try to poison a search engine, they're able to make sure they get their attacks in the top. For Twitter, they're more so kind of playing the odds and seeing where they end up in that random stream. And so this is what explains this only 1% number. But as we get further along, we're going to show some examples of specifically the types of things that are happening inside of Twitter. So if you look at the daily activity for each of the engines, you saw every day Google led the pack. Different days, different engines had a little bit more or less. But what becomes interesting is pretty much every day each engine led to something malicious. No engine really took a day off. But if you look at the different days of the week, one of the first things that we wanted to look at was, hey, if you look across the week, are there particular days that have more activity? And the short answer is no, not really. Tuesday led about a little bit, represented about 16.7% of the overall malware for the week. But there wasn't a strong correlation about the day of the week. But what was a little interesting is if you look at the time of the day. So these time periods are based on in Eastern Standard Time. But if you look at the 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. blank, really over 50% of the malware was found in this cycle. You were gonna? Usually Dave points out kind of the things that are happening at this time of the night, or what's happening at that time of the day if you're in Europe. But the next thing that we looked at, we're seeing that between the 11 to 5 a.m. slot, over 50% of the malware was showing up. So if you think about this engine running around the clock, pulling the popular search terms, pulling the results, and then analyzing those, we had over 50% of activity in that 6-hour block that was the end of the night. Another question that we looked to answer was, were these known attacks? Or were these attacks that were new? Kind of what types of attacks or malware they're using on the other end of search poisoning. So this looks at kind of over time, the amount of malware that was detected each day that was kind of found on the previous day, but wasn't detected till later. You want to add to that, or is that?
So let's take a break for a moment. How many people are here because they couldn't get to the Barnaby Jack talk? Raise your hands. You're a bunch of lying people, you know that? So it's funny, let's go back a second. The malware captured by time. So, everything in my world is acclimated by Eastern Standard Time, which is the best time zone. However, we take a look at the breakdown in time, and no one on the East Coast is working between 11 and 5 unless you're asking if you want fries with that. So if you take a look and correlate this, who is working generally are people in Eastern Europe or in Asia somewhere. That kind of fits into a weird kind of hacker time, because you also have to invert the time that people you would think that normal people work and make that hacker time. So the amount of malware detected each day. It's kind of a funny thing because it went, I was expecting when we went into this research, completely with our own biases, and we thought, we had ideas of what we'd find, and the days that seemed to have the most malware were the days that seemed to correlate to the biggest like pop culture events, like the MTV Music Awards, and things like that. And it's kind of represented in the chart. So we started this research, and research ran for 57 days. And that's a number we picked that we felt would be a good indication of total traffic. So it ran for 57 days from April to June. And there were a lot of kind of pop culture stuff that happened in there. As you see towards the end of the graph, that's World Cup malware and stuff like that. At the beginning, it's more, Justin Bieber malware. So, and if anybody thinks that kid's not evil, this is the second topic we give him this week, and he's a primary reason why people's machines get infected. So if you have kids and they buy Justin Bieber CDs, tell them they're going to get viruses.
Got it. So if you look at this, kind of one of the points of this particular point is that 98% of the malware that we found on the other end of these search results was identifiable by the techniques that we use. So one of the things to understand, if you look at the results that we pulled and the ways that we analyze them. So we used 3 different methods. One was a traditional category-based URL filtering database. So kind of looking at the URL and seeing what category of site is this. Right, so everybody kind of understands the limitations there. A second source that we used was Google's Safe Browse lookups. Okay, so everyone kind of understands the Safe Browse lookup. The third type of analysis that we used was a malicious JavaScript detector. And so what this does is actually kind of pull the JavaScript that's sitting on the page and look for behavior that indicates kind of unwanted activity. Looking for too many create elements, looking for code that's being re-eval within the browser, and so forth. So those are kind of really the 3 detection techniques that we use to flag the different malware. And the point here is 98% of the malware that were on the other side of these search results were detectable. Right, so kind of the good news is that attackers aren't using kind of true, say, 0-day on the other end of search results. 98% of the stuff is detectable if someone was actually using something in between them. So,
low-hanging fruit. We're going for the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, basically, as David said, kind of pointed out, looking at the low-hanging fruit. So we'll look at some examples in a second. One of the other interesting things that we came across in this is really looking at the relationship between the different search engines. If you look at something that pops up on Twitter versus something that pops up on Google or Bing or Yahoo, kind of what's the difference in timing or delay on the time that it shows up on Twitter and the times it shows up on different search engines. And so this takes a look at this. This looks at the top 10 trending topics on Twitter and looks at how long it took them to show up on a different search engine. And so the green bar here is the number of days on Yahoo, the red bar is on Bing, the blue bar is on Google.
If there's no bar, it didn't show up.
Exactly. So if there's no bar, it didn't show up on the other search engines. And so what you see is this delay. And so what happened is, on average, it took 1.2 days for something to become a trending topic on Google after it became a trending topic on Twitter. It took about a little over 4 days, 4.3 days to become a trending topic on Bing, and 4.8 days on Yahoo. And so what's interesting, this was now the set of things that were trending topics on Twitter. Now, there were things that were trending topics on the search engines that were not on Twitter. And so what we saw in general is like things that were kind of culture related or pop related became trending topics on Twitter first, and things that were like more serious news, like the oil spill or election results, those things became trending topics on the search engine before they became topics on Twitter. And I mean, kind of one of the points in understanding this is, from an attacker's viewpoint, kind of where should you target your attacks first? If you see kind of the timing of when things move from one network to another and they're going to become popular and going to become things that people are searching for, this gives a pretty interesting roadmap for where you should spend your attention early on in a particular event that's happening.
So when you go home, make sure you tell your kids that if they search for news sites, they're less likely to get malware than if they search for Justin Bieber. We really don't like that kid, I gotta be honest.
So here's a view of kind of all the trending topics that we looked at. Over the 25,000 trending topics, what types of sites were trending? So what are the categories? And so one of the top things here is news. So 26% of the sites that were trending were news sites. After that was entertainment. So 23% of the sites were entertainment. And after that, things pointed to news groups and to streaming media and so forth. So no big surprises here. People like news and people like entertainment. Right now, if you take a look at the top categories for malware, it's a little different. One of the things you see here is the top site is category spyware. So 35% of the sites they were pointed to were classified by traditional URL filtering engine as being bad sites. So these were sites that were known to continually to carry malware over time. So that's kind of the good news. We're able to capture a third of this just based with web filtering technology. But then you see entertainment here. You see search engines here. You don't see news pretty high up in the results. So one thing we want to look at were the particular categories that malware liked or didn't like. So what we saw is these are the top 10 categories overall. So news being one, entertainment, then forum and news groups. If you look at the third column, that's the ranking for malware. So news, while it was the number one site overall for trending topics, it was number 17 for malware. If you look at streaming media, while it was number 4 overall, it was 21 for malware. Sports, similarly, number 6 overall, but 14 for malware. So this shows examples of the types of sites that malware authors don't necessarily particularly like to target. But then if you look at categories that are popular, you see some names that you would expect. You see kind of overall the malware ranking for hosting sites is number 5, where in general it's 20. If you look at peer-to-peer, it's number 6 for malware, but number 46 overall. So you see some of the usual suspects, hosting, peer-to-peer, and proxy sites being targeted by the search terms where they're leading to. Kind of from there, I want to transition a little bit over to some more specific, like looking at the domains and looking at some actual examples of malware that we saw on the other side of these links. Somebody want to walk through?
So these aren't a lot of big surprises, except for the Poland thing. I mean, the most malware we found seemed to be hosted in Poland, and although that's technically somewhere around the Eastern European place that everybody quotes to the media, all the malware comes from, I just didn't think the Polish had it in them. But apparently they did.
What?
Right. So, it's normal stuff. Casa.com, 5 ounces of pain. MC Hawking. You know what? It might sound like to you we've never looked at these before, but every time we look at these, it's just shocking. And what is this hope? Hope? Don't know. But these are the top domains that we found. And like I said, like Paul said, we use 3 different methods to do this: the Google Safe Browse, our internal database, and a tool called MJD. And we would cross verify the results with each one of those tools, and actually go and do random spot checks to make sure we were actually getting malware and it wasn't just false positives. So here's an example of a guy named LeBron James. I don't personally know who he is. I think he's a golfer. Apparently his wife hit him with a club or something. I don't know.